today we're here with Icon Suspension and Scott Spiva here to talk about the line and offering that Icon makes for the consumer market and aftermarket suspension components and wheels. Scott, why don't you tell us a little bit about what's down here?
So this is our 4.5-inch to 5.5-inch lift Super Duty kit here. And we offer that for multiple different year ranges. This one's like the 23 and up behind us here. The coilover is a bit different. You know, we see a lot of coil spring lifts and that sort of thing, but the coilover is a lot nicer in the sense that you have more control over the setup of the, namely the ride height. And so you can fine tune that versus being stuck with a certain amount of lift provided by a coil. And so it gives you some room to grow over time. We use a linear coil versus a progressive dual rate coil in our regular coil kits, and you get a really nice soft spring rate through here. And so you also avoid that, that ramp up and spring rate through the suspension travel, which, while great for performance, if you're not really using the truck in that manner, sometimes you can feel that change. And so this gives you, a really nice, smooth ride without that, that aggressiveness, really.
And like you mentioned, you touched on adjustability. So if, let's say you're going to want to buy these new trucks, and one of the first things a lot of these guys do, they want to make a cosmetic change. And one of those cosmetic changes ends up being a bumper that weighs 200 pounds. You can actually make that adjustment here and get that dialed in, right?
Correct, yeah, you can adjust it up, regain that height, depending on, what your setup is. If you have something super heavy, there are options to swap coils, for different spring rates and stuff like that. I always recommend hit us up, let us know what you got going on, and we can figure out if what the best route would be. But, you have an option versus just, 2.5 inches is 2.5 inches, and that's all she wrote, and start having the stack spacers. So it's really nice to have that control over the, the whole setup.
So really good adjustability that Icon offers in their coilover conversion kits that a lot of people don't really think about in terms of really getting your Super Duty or any of the bigger trucks, or even some of the lighter trucks, to really drive right when you've made some of those adjustments to the cosmetics of the vehicle and the weight, winches, bumpers, things like that. Now moving on, you've got a really innovative product here, which is a factory drop bracket for the factory radius arms on the Super Duties, right?
Correct. And so this would be for like a 4.5-inch lift. And it's to correct the geometry front end, reduce the control arm angle, as well as make sure your caster is within spec. So you got some options there. So that allows you to use your factory radius arm again, but there's a lot of benefits to swapping radius arm too. So we got you covered where you don't need the bracket for the taller lifts if you run our full fabricated radius arm. That allows for better tire clearance. You've got more ground clearance because you don't have this hanging below the frame, and it's a lot stronger. And what makes it a bit different than other, aftermarket radius arms is that we're going for that OE feel with it, where you don't have, a spherical bearing in the frame pivot. We went with like a factory style bushing, so that it, one is noise-free and keeps that same comfort. Having a bunch of hard mounts everywhere, while it's performance-wise it works great, you can feel that. We're driving around on a lot, smaller chatter bumps and stuff like that. It can be a little bit harsh, so it's a good mix of the two.
Back over here in the front, we've got a really interesting product that Icon makes, which allows you to keep the factory track bar, but be able to adjust it over time for what you're doing for the vehicle in terms of ride lift or ride lowering, right?
Correct, yep. So when you go taller with the ride height, you ideally want a longer track bar, and that's to hold the axle centered under the frame. And so usually we would do an adjustable track bar for that, which works great. But the factory geometry from Ford basically is not perfect. And so the track bar and the steering drag link are supposed to be completely parallel, and they're not exactly. And so at stock height, it's not so bad, but as you go taller in the ride height, that difference becomes a lot more pronounced, and you start getting some steering feedback, or what people refer to as bump steer. And so the purpose of the bracket is to drop that track bar just a scotch so that those angles are now more parallel and remove that steering feedback. Cost-wise is, very modest compared to everything else, and I kind of consider it to be almost a requirement anymore, just because it makes that big of a difference. And so you can still run the stock bar if you want, keep that cost under control, but get the better geometry and the drivability. And kind of the best of both worlds is if you run the adjustable track bar on top of this, because now you have the same geometry correction, but also the more rigid track bar and elimination of that factory deflected bushing.
Yep.
So the handling characteristics improve dramatically.
So really, Icon has you covered in both aspects, because you can purchase this on a stock vehicle, use stock it, run it the way it is, make the adjustments to it because it comes with an adjustment key to be able to allow you to change from 2.5 to 4.5.
Correct.
And then actually continue to use that. But when you want to, you can actually buy their adjustable track bar, which is a great product as well. Tie that in, and now you've got the best of all worlds.
Absolutely. Eventually, a factory bar is going to wear out, and it's cost-wise, it almost makes more sense to buy an aftermarket one. So ours will pop right in, super easy bolt-on, and then you're all set.
Now moving on to here, this is one of your 2.5 shock offerings, but you guys offer a whole plethora of shocks, so we can talk about those as well. But tell us a little bit about these. These tie together with your 4.5-inch kit in this application.
So this is the 2.5-inch diameter internal reservoir. And we offer an internal reservoir configuration, piggyback and remote reservoir. We also have the adjustable versions with our CDC valve, which is a manual compression adjuster knob. We also have the electronic adjustment with the CDE valve. You have a whole bunch of different shock packages you can choose from, but for a big heavy truck like a Super Duty, I almost always recommend the 2.5s. They're just better able to handle the weight of the truck, kind of the intended duty. A lot of times you're gonna have some weight in the back and trailer, whatnot. So the bigger shocks just don't have to work as hard. They're not gonna generate as much heat. And even if you're not using it in a performance setting, you actually tend to see longer seal life because the temperature spikes aren't so extreme. When you're towing heavy, you're putting a lot of force in that shock, and that force, it's converting that into heat. That's what they do. So we offer them for the fronts and the rears, coilover conversions. You can run a secondary shock in the front if you'd like to, in the factory location. And all the non-coilover apps these days are a impact extruded, hard anodized aluminum body. So we get that real consistent finish and no corrosion issues over time. Keep that shock looking nice.
They won't rust out over time, so you buy them and you keep them.
Exactly, yep. And that, segues perfectly into the serviceability. The shocks they're an investment. And so these shocks will last you the lifetime of the truck, as long as you maintain them. Just like any other shock absorber, they are pretty much one big wearable item. And so over time you got to replace stuff, you got to change the oil just like your engine oil. And as long as you do that at a somewhat regular interval over time, they'll go forever and ever and ever and work just as good as a brand new shock, albeit maybe not as shiny.
Well, that's a great investment over time when it comes to looking at shocks and making sure you size it right for the type of vehicle that you're driving.
The philosophy of use is everything.
Yeah. Moving on to your spring packs. Now this is a little different than a normal average full spring kit. This is a new item that you guys have developed.
So this is the 2-inch lift expansion pack. And so it basically keeps the main leaf from your OE leaf pack, and you can keep the upper overload if you would like. But this will give you some lift as well as improving the overall rear ride quality. And that's achieved by basically extending the distance before the overload's engaged on the rest of the pack to be more compliant over smaller bumps. If that's engaging really early, the back seems like it wants to bounce over stuff, and it won't compress and let the shocks do their work. They're meant to carry a bunch of weight. And so this is a excellent option for guys that maybe don't have a bunch of weight in there all the time, but still want that usability of the truck when you do. It's a good best of both worlds sort of scenario, and you can still run airbags with it or other supplemental spring rate devices, whatever they may be, if you need a little bit more.
Well, for those of us who have these HD rigs, a 350 or a 3500 Dodge, and they're great trucks, lots of power, super fun to drive, except for when you run them over bumps with a stock system on them. I mean, it's jarring, you feel like you're gonna lose your fillings. So Icon's really come up with a neat idea here, being able to add something that doesn't lose the towing capacity, but gives you that ability of driving the vehicle and actually enjoying it in terms of running over that kind of stuff. And then when you need it, it's already built in.
Exactly. And it can be configured for lots of different lift heights. Axle wrap is better. Overall, it's a very nice spring for a modest price.
Now moving on to this next piece, this is a piece that you guys used to have as an option. Now you guys include it in all of your kits, and I think this is a great idea for those who put on one of these larger lift kits. One of the things you always run into is you're putting on the suspension and the whole thing is sitting there dropping, and all of a sudden you're tugging on your brake lines. A lot of people will rip them, tear them, break them off. So Icon has actually made a full side up kit that comes with their larger shock packages that allows you to solve that problem.
Totally. In the past, we always used drop brackets. It'd been some hard lines, and we offered a extended length kit as an option. But it became so popular, and we're kind of honestly pushing the travel so far these days that it just makes sense to include them. And so it's a lot nicer than trying to bend the factory lines, worry about breaking something and getting it all back into place. Direct remove and replace, bolts right into factory positions using an OE style bracket. And aside from bleeding the brakes, it's super easy and it gives you that nice clean install and it's all said and done. And you know, not hokey business, but drop brackets, that sort of thing.
Super easy installation as well, and it comes with their larger kit, so it's a really nice addition that Icon's kind of packaged together to make their product offering better for the consumer. Now, the last thing we've got here is something that a lot of people don't know that Icon makes, which is wheels. So tell us a little bit about that.
The Icon Alloys line of wheels pretty much came from the fact that we would always recommend specific wheel offsets and backspaces for our suspension systems, and they weren't always offered by a lot of the wheel manufacturers. And then also too, a lot of people don't really understand possibly what goes into that. What does this offset mean? How's that gonna make it look? How's that gonna let me fit a bigger tire? That sort of thing. So we try to take out all the guesswork and we make a line of wheels that are application specific for the vehicle. So the offset, the backspacing, all the brake clearances, everything is set up for whatever truck it's going on. So it takes the guesswork out of it. And you have a ton of different options as far as the spoke design goes, the colors, diameters, you name it. You know, at this point in time, we've got so many SKUs, we're getting to be a real wheel company instead of just a handful of options.
Well, and for those of us who buy suspension kits, and then the first thing we want to do is lift the truck, make it look cool, and try to figure out wheel and tire package. And you go and look at a manufacturer's website, whoever it might be, for a lift, and they've got all these sizes, and people will look at those like, I don't know, I want it to be this big. You guys have really thought through that process to make it a cohesive package with your suspension systems, so you get something that doesn't rub on the truck or ride really off or track wrong.
Exactly. Yeah, try to get the biggest tire possible to clear in a dynamic performance scenario. It's full compression, full steering lock, full droop, full steering lock, and all that gets taken into account. Not only just like, okay, does it look cool when it's sitting here? It's all part of the game. Try to make the truck wheel nice, drive nice on the road too.
Well, there you have it. Icon Suspension really is a company that has everything that you need to be able to make your vehicle ride the way you want it to, look the way you want it to, and they even have wheels to actually make it cosmetically the way you want it to as well. If you have any questions about Icon's products, feel free to leave them in the comments and we'll get with you as soon as we can.